The cantina on Epsilon Prime was nearly empty at this hour. Most traders and travelers had moved on to their ships or found rooms for the night. Only a few remained, nursing their drinks in the dim blue light that filtered through the station's old windows. Commander Zekthara sat alone in the corner booth, his massive frame hunched over a glass of fermented sap. His chitinous armor bore the scars of countless battles, and his 4 eyes held the weight of memories he had carried for too long. The Valdorian warrior had agreed to this meeting after months of requests from galactic news networks. Helix 9 approached the table carefully. The mechanical journalist had covered wars across the galaxy, but this interview would be different. This was the first time any Valdorian veteran had agreed to speak publicly about the human conflicts that had changed everything. "Commander Zekthara," Helix 9 said, its voice modulator creating soft tones designed to put subjects at ease. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." The alien veteran looked up slowly. His scarred face showed no emotion, but his primary eyes focused on the reporter with sharp attention. "I have carried these memories for 20 years, he said, his voice deep and rough. "Perhaps it is time others knew the truth about what we faced." Helix 9 activated its recording devices and settled into the booth across from the commander. "Tell me about the first time your people encountered humans." Zekthara took a long drink from his glass before answering. "We were expanding into what you call the Sol system. It was routine work. We had done it hundreds of times before with other species. The Empire had been growing for 1,000 years, and we knew how to handle primitive civilizations." The commander's secondary eyes closed as he remembered. The humans had just learned to travel between stars. Their ships were crude, held together with metal bolts and powered by simple fusion reactors. We laughed at their technology. Our smallest patrol ship could destroy their entire fleet. Fleet Admiral Karthek was in command of the expansion force. Zekthara continued. He was a proud warrior, decorated in dozens of campaigns. He had conquered 7 species in his career. The humans would be his 8th, and he expected it to be the easiest. Helix 9 leaned forward slightly. "What were your first impressions of human military capabilities?" "Pathetic," Zekthara said without hesitation. Their leader was a human named Jake Murphy. He commanded their defense fleet from a ship called the UES Liberty. When we arrived at the edge of their system, Murphy sent us a message. He told us to turn around and leave, or they would fight us. The alien veteran shook his head slowly. "We had heard such threats before. Every species tries to sound brave when they first see our ships, but they always surrender when they realize how outmatched they are. We expected the humans to do the same." "But they didn't surrender," Helix 9 prompted. "No, they did not." Zekthara's voice grew quieter. "Murphy had a tactical officer named Amy Foster. She was young, maybe 25 in human years. When we sent our standard surrender demand, she was the one who replied. Her exact words were recorded in our ship logs. She said, 'We'd rather die than bow to alien scum like you.'" The commander paused, staring into his drink. "Other species had called us names before. It meant nothing to us. But there was something in her voice, something we had never heard before. Pure hate mixed with absolute determination. She meant every word. The first battle took place near the moons of their gas giant Jupiter," Zekthara continued. "We sent a small force to test their defenses. 12 of our ships against their entire fleet of 30 vessels. By all logic, we should have won easily." Helix 9 waited patiently as the veteran gathered his thoughts. "The humans fought like nothing we had ever seen," Zekthara said finally. "When their ships were damaged, they didn't retreat. When their weapons failed, they didn't surrender. When their engines were destroyed, they used their remaining power to ram our vessels. The aliens' primary eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls. I was aboard the cruiser Valdeth when the human ship Courage crashed into our port side. The impact killed everyone on the human vessel instantly, but it also tore a hole in our hull that took 3 days to repair. Murphy's ship, the Liberty, was the last one standing," Zekthara continued. "It was surrounded by 8 of our ships. Its weapons were gone, its engines barely working. Any rational commander would have surrendered to save his crew. But Murphy wasn't rational? Murphy was human, Zekthera said, as if that explained everything. He sent one final message to our fleet. He said his crew had voted to fight to the death rather than live as slaves. He thanked them for the honor of serving with them. Then he activated his ship's self-destruct sequence. The commander's voice grew heavy. The explosion took out 2 of our ships and damaged a 3rd. We had won the battle, but we had lost more vessels than in any single engagement in the past 50 years. And this was just their first line of defense. How did Fleet Admiral Karthek react? He was furious, Zekthara replied. He sent a message back to Imperial Command demanding reinforcements. He said the humans were using suicide tactics and dishonorable warfare. High Command told him to stop making excuses and finish the conquest. Zekthara finished his drink and signaled for another. That was our first mistake. We thought Murphy and his crew were exceptions, fanatics who didn't represent their species. We were wrong. Every human we encountered fought with the same desperate fury. The second battle was at Mars, the veteran continued. We sent a much larger force expecting to overwhelm them quickly. The humans had built defense platforms around their red planet. Our ships destroyed them easily, but not before they had inflicted more damage than we expected. What made human tactics so effective against your forces? Zekthara considered the question carefully. We had rules, he said finally. Laws of war that had been followed for centuries. When an enemy ship was disabled, you allowed them to surrender. When facing civilians, you gave them time to evacuate. When capturing territory, you treated prisoners with honor. The humans had no such rules? The humans had only one rule, Zekthara said grimly. Survive at any cost. They didn't care about honor or tradition or the proper way to conduct warfare. They cared about protecting their world and their people, and they would do anything to achieve that goal. The mechanical journalist processed this information. When did you realize this war would be different from previous conquests? During the evacuation of the Mars colonies, Zekthara answered. Human civilians were fleeing the planet on transport ships. Our standard procedure was to scan the vessels for military equipment and then allow them to pass. But the 3rd transport we checked exploded when our boarding party entered. The alien veteran's eyes darkened. It was full of explosives and volunteers. 20 human civilians had sacrificed themselves to kill 12 of our soldiers. We learned later that every transport ship was potentially a bomb. We could not tell which ones carried real refugees and which ones carried suicide bombers. That was when Fleet Admiral Karthek understood what we were really fighting, Zekthara said. Not just another species to be conquered, but an entire race willing to die rather than submit. He sent another message to High Command requesting permission to withdraw. What was their response? They relieved him of command. Zekthara said bitterly. They sent General Vextak to replace him, along with orders to crush human resistance by any means necessary. They still believed this was a normal war that could be won through superior firepower. The commander looked directly at Helix 9. They were wrong, and by the time they realized their mistake, it was too late for all of us. Helix 9 watched as Commander Zekthara ordered his 3rd drink of the evening. The alien veteran's hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass, a detail the mechanical journalist noted for the record. The scars on the commander's chitinous armor seemed to tell their own stories in the dim cantina light. General Vextak arrived with the largest invasion force the Empire had ever assembled. Zekthara continued, his voice growing darker. 500 ships, 2 million soldiers, orbital bombardment platforms, and weapons that could crack a planet's crust. High Command wanted to make an example of humanity. The veteran paused, staring at his reflection in the liquid. Vextak was different from Karthek. He was ruthless, efficient, and had no patience for what he called primitive resistance. He planned to overwhelm Earth's defenses in a single massive assault. But the humans had been preparing, Helix 9 observed. Yes, they had been preparing, Zekthara agreed grimly. While we were gathering our forces, they were changing everything about how they fought. They studied our previous battles, learned our weaknesses, and developed new tactics that we had never seen before. The commander's secondary eyes closed, as he remembered. The human ground forces were led by a woman named Lisa Carter. She was a general, but she fought like no general we had ever encountered. When we landed on Mars to establish our forward base, we expected to face their army in open battle. Instead, Carter's forces vanished. Zekathara nodded slowly. 300,000 human soldiers simply disappeared into Mars's underground tunnel systems. For 2 weeks, we controlled the surface completely. We built our bases, established supply lines, and prepared for the assault on Earth. We thought we had won the first phase of the invasion. Then the attacks began. The alien veteran's voice became quieter, more strained. Our supply convoys would travel the same routes every day, safe routes, protected by patrols and air support. But the humans had been watching, learning our patterns. They would strike without warning, destroy everything, and vanish before our reinforcements arrived. How did they manage to avoid your detection systems? They used the planet against us, Zekathara explained. Mars has dust storms that can last for months. The humans moved through these storms like ghosts. Our sensors could not track them through the interference. They knew their world better than we did. The commander took another drink before continuing. General Carter had divided her forces into small groups, maybe 10 or 20 soldiers each. They lived in the tunnel systems, supplied by hidden caches of food and weapons. Each group operated independently, but somehow they coordinated their attacks perfectly. One of these groups was led by a human colonel named Ryan Blake, Zekathara said, his voice filled with something that might have been grudging respect. Blake was a master of what humans called guerrilla warfare. He taught his soldiers to blend in with civilian populations, to hide among refugees, to turn everyday objects into weapons. Helix 9 leaned forward. Can you give me a specific example? The bombing of Supply Depot 7, Zekathara replied without hesitation. Blake's unit disguised themselves as human refugees seeking shelter. Our soldiers followed protocol and processed them through the security checkpoints. The humans had hidden explosives inside artificial limbs, fake medical implants, even children's toys. The alien veteran's primary eyes focused on the journalist. 27 of my soldiers died in that explosion. Good soldiers, following the rules of war as we understood them. But the humans didn't follow our rules. They couldn't afford to. How did this affect your forces' morale? It terrified them, Zekathara admitted. We were used to fighting enemies, who behaved predictably. When facing the Crystalline Collective, we knew they would defend their homeworlds with orbital platforms. When fighting the Drifter clans, we knew they would hit our supply lines with fast raids. But humans were different. The commander gestured with one of his forearms. Every human civilian could be a spy. Every piece of debris could hide a bomb. Every act of surrender could be a trap. My soldiers stopped sleeping properly. They jumped at shadows. They began shooting first and asking questions later. The psychological warfare was just as effective as the physical attacks, Zekathara continued. The humans would leave messages for us, written in our own language. They told us about our families back home, described our personal habits, mentioned things they could only know through intelligence gathering. They were inside your command structure? Deeper than we ever imagined, the veteran confirmed. Later, we learned that human intelligence operatives had been intercepting our communications for months. They knew our battle plans before some of our own officers did. A woman named Susan Price led their intelligence division. She was a scientist, but she understood warfare better than most of our generals. Zekathara's voice grew heavy with memory. Price developed biological weapons specifically designed to target Valdorian physiology. Other species in the galaxy had such weapons but refused to use them. They considered biological warfare to be dishonorable, against the accepted rules of civilized conflict. But humans had no such restrictions? Humans had no restrictions at all, Zekathara said bitterly. Price's weapons didn't kill us directly. Instead, they made us sick, weak, unable to fight effectively. Our medical teams couldn't develop counters fast enough. Entire battalions would become ill overnight. The alien veteran paused to order another drink. His movements were slower now, the weight of memory pressing down on him. The worst part was not knowing which water sources were contaminated, which air supplies were poisoned, Which food shipments carried the biological agents? We became afraid of our own supplies. Tell me about the Battle of Titan, Helix 9 prompted. Zekathar's entire body stiffened at the mention. Titan was supposed to be our great victory. The humans had a mining facility on Saturn's moon that produced fuel for their ships. General Vextak decided to capture it intact to prove that human defenses could be broken. The facility was defended by only 200 human soldiers led by a major named Kevin Ross. We sent 5,000 troops to take it. It should have been over in hours. The commander's voice became barely audible. Ross had spent months preparing that facility. Every corridor was trapped. Every room was a potential ambush point. Every door could hide explosives. His soldiers fought from positions they had built specifically to kill as many of us as possible before dying. The battle lasted 3 days. We lost soldiers to booby traps, sniper fire, improvised explosives, and suicide attacks. When we finally cornered Ross and his remaining 20 soldiers in the main reactor chamber, we demanded their surrender. Zekthar looked directly at the journalist. Ross looked at us through the blast doors and smiled. He said his only regret was that he couldn't kill more of us. Then he detonated the reactor. The explosion killed everyone in the facility, including Ross and his soldiers, but it also killed 3,000 of our troops and destroyed half our assault fleet orbiting above. Ross had turned his defeat into our greatest single loss of the war. How did this affect General Vextak's strategy? It broke him, Zekthar said simply. Vextak had expected to crush human resistance through superior numbers and firepower. Instead, he watched his forces being worn down by an enemy that refused to fight fairly. Every victory cost us more than we could afford. The alien veteran finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. After Titan, Vextak began using orbital bombardment against human positions. He told High Command that ground invasions were too costly, but even that didn't work the way we expected. Why not? Because the humans had prepared for that too, Zekthara replied. They had moved their important facilities underground, scattered their forces, and learned to hide from our sensors. We could destroy empty buildings and abandoned bases, but we couldn't find their real military assets. And the war continued to escalate? The war became something none of us had imagined, Zekthara said, his voice filled with exhaustion. We were no longer fighting a conquest campaign. We were fighting for survival against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every defeat. And other species were beginning to take notice. The commander looked up at Helix 9 with all 4 eyes. That was when everything truly changed, when the galaxy realized that the humans weren't just another primitive species to be conquered or ignored. They were something new, something dangerous, something that could threaten the established order of things. And the other species began choosing sides? Some did, Zekthara confirmed. Others tried to stay neutral, but neutrality became impossible when the humans proved they could fight the mighty Valdorian Empire to a standstill. Everyone had to decide what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. The alien veteran signaled for the server to bring him another drink. The third phase of the war was about to begin, and none of us were prepared for what came next. The cantina had grown even quieter as the night progressed. Only a few patrons remained scattered at distant tables, their conversations barely audible over the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Commander Zekthara sat hunched over, his 5th drink, his scarred armor reflecting the blue emergency lighting that had automatically dimmed for the night cycle. Helix 9 remained perfectly still, its recording devices capturing every word, every pause, every subtle change in the alien veteran's voice. The mechanical journalist had covered countless conflicts, but this interview was revealing truths that would reshape galactic understanding of the human wars. The third phase began when other species started taking sides, Zekthara said, his voice slurred slightly from the alcohol. The Crystari Federation had been watching our struggle with growing concern. They feared that if humans could resist the Empire, other species might follow their example. The commander's secondary eyes focused on distant memories. The Crystari made a formal alliance with us. They provided ships, weapons, and soldiers to help crush human resistance. In return, we promised them territorial rights in the outer systems once Earth was conquered. But the Drifter clans remained neutral. The Drifters were wise, Zekthara replied. Their leaders understood something we did not. They sent observers to watch the battles but refused to commit their fleets to either side. They said they wanted to see how the war ended before deciding who deserved their support. The alien veteran took a long drink before continuing. Other species began making their own calculations. The Hive Collective offered to mediate peace talks. The machine worlds increased their defensive preparations. Everyone was watching to see if the impossible could actually happen. What impossible thing? That humans could defeat the greatest military power in the galaxy, Zekthara said simply. For 1,000 years the Empire had been unstoppable. We had conquered over 300 worlds, subjugated dozens of species, and built the largest fleet ever assembled. The idea that primitives with crude technology could stand against us was unthinkable. The commander's primary eyes closed as he remembered. Admiral Paul Jenkins proved us wrong. He commanded the human fleet during the Great Battle at Wolf 359. We had assembled over 800 ships for the final assault on Earth's solar system. Jenkins had barely 300 vessels to defend his homeworld. The odds were clearly in your favor. By every military calculation, yes, Zekthara agreed. Our ships were larger, faster, and more heavily armed. Our crews were experienced veterans of dozens of campaigns. Jenkins was commanding a fleet of converted cargo ships, mining vessels and patrol boats held together with desperate repairs. The alien veteran shook his head slowly. But numbers and technology mean nothing if your enemy refuses to fight the way you expect them to. Jenkins understood this better than any of our admirals. What did he do differently? He turned his ships into weapons, Zekthara replied, his voice filled with something between admiration and horror. When the battle began, Jenkins divided his fleet into small groups and scattered them throughout the system. We thought he was retreating, trying to avoid direct confrontation. The commander paused to signal for another drink. Instead, Jenkins was positioning his ships for coordinated suicide attacks. Each group would engage a portion of our fleet, fight until their ships were critically damaged, then detonate their reactors in precise patterns. The explosions created debris fields that crippled our larger vessels, Zekthara continued. Chunks of metal and burning plasma moving at tremendous speeds. Our shields could stop energy weapons and small projectiles, but not the wreckage of entire starships. Helix 9 processed this information carefully. How many ships did you lose? Over 400 vessels destroyed or disabled, the veteran admitted. Jenkins lost his entire fleet, but he had reduced our armada to barely 300 functional ships. And those that remained were damaged, demoralized, and running low on supplies. Did Admiral Jenkins survive the battle? No, Zekthara said quietly. His flagship was the last ship to detonate. We recovered the wreckage later and found his final message recorded in the ship's log. He said he was honored to die alongside his crew in defense of humanity. He asked that his sacrifice inspire others to continue the fight. The alien veteran's voice grew heavier. That message was broadcast throughout human space. Instead of breaking their morale, Jenkins' death made them fight even harder. They began calling him a martyr, a hero who showed them the path to victory. The war was turning against you. The war had already turned, Zekthara corrected. We just refused to admit it. High Command sent new orders demanding that we finish the conquest immediately. They threatened to replace the entire command structure if we failed again. The commander's scarred face showed the weight of old pain. That was when Captain Rachel Stone led her covert mission into our home space. Stone was part of human intelligence trained in deep infiltration and sabotage. She had volunteered for a mission that everyone knew was suicide. What was her objective? To prove that nowhere in Valdorian space was safe from human retaliation, Zekthara replied. Stone and her team spent months learning our language, studying our culture, and preparing false identities. They infiltrated the orbital defense platforms around our capital world. The alien veteran's primary eyes focused on the journalist. For 6 months, Stone lived among us. She worked as a maintenance technician on Platform 7, one of the most secure installations in the Empire. She learned our routines, befriended our soldiers, and slowly gathered intelligence about our defenses. How did she avoid detection? She was perfect, Zekthara said with grudging admiration. Stone spoke our language without accent, understood our customs, and even participated in our religious ceremonies. Some of our soldiers considered her a friend. They trusted her completely. The commander took a long drink before continuing. When Stone finally acted, she didn't just sabotage the platforms, she turned them against each other. The orbital defense grid that protected our homeworld began firing on itself. Within hours, our most secure system was defenseless. But the sabotage was detected? Too late to matter, Zekthara replied. Stone and her team had planted explosives throughout the platform network. When security forces tried to stop them, the humans detonated everything simultaneously. The explosion could be seen from the planet's surface. The alien veteran's voice became barely audible. 12 defense platforms destroyed, thousands of our best technicians and soldiers killed, and worst of all, the psychological impact on our people. If humans could strike at our homeworld, nowhere was truly safe. Stone died in the explosion. She chose to die, Zekthara corrected. Our forces had cornered her team in the command center of Platform 7. They could have surrendered and been taken prisoner. Instead, Stone sent a final message to Human Command reporting the success of her mission. Then she triggered the final detonation. The commander stared into his drink. Her last words were recorded by our communication systems. She said she hoped her death would help end the war quickly so that no more soldiers on either side would have to die. Even while destroying our defenses, she showed concern for our lives. This affected how your people viewed humans. It changed everything, Zekthara admitted. Stone had lived among us, worked beside us, and even shown kindness to our soldiers. But when duty called, she killed thousands of us without hesitation. We began to understand that humans were not simple barbarians or mindless killers. The alien veteran looked directly at Helix 9. They were something far more dangerous. They were intelligent, adaptable, and absolutely committed to their cause. They could be your friend one day and your executioner the next, depending on what their mission required. How did this realization affect the war effort? Our soldiers began questioning everything, Zekthara replied. They wondered if their human prisoners were actually intelligence operatives. They suspected their own allies of being infiltrators. They became afraid to trust anyone who wasn't from their immediate unit. The commander finished his drink and gestured for another. Meanwhile, human resistance was growing stronger. Every defeat seemed to teach them new lessons. Every loss made them more determined. They were learning faster than we could adapt. And then there was Commander Tim Walsh. Zekthara's entire body stiffened at the mention of the name. Walsh was captured during a failed assault on Kepler Station. We thought we had finally caught a high-ranking human officer who could provide valuable intelligence about their plans. But the interrogation didn't go as expected. Walsh was a master of deception, the veteran said slowly. For 3 months, our best interrogators worked on him. They used psychological pressure, physical discomfort, and mental manipulation techniques that had broken dozens of other prisoners. The alien commander's voice grew quiet. Walsh pretended to break. He gave us information that seemed valuable but was actually false. He fed us intelligence that led our fleets into traps. He convinced us he was cooperating while secretly gathering information about our own operations. How did he escape? He didn't escape, Zekthara corrected. We released him. After months of apparent cooperation, we believed he had truly switched sides. The cantina's lights had dimmed to their lowest setting, casting long shadows across empty tables and abandoned chairs. Commander Zekthara sat slumped in his booth, his massive frame weighed down by memories and alcohol. The empty glasses before him told the story of a long night, but Helix 9 remained alert, knowing that the most important revelations often came at the end of such interviews. The final phase of the war began with the Battle of Kepler 442b. Zekthara said, his voice now barely above a whisper. It was supposed to be a minor engagement, a chance for our demoralized forces to claim an easy victory against a small human outpost. The alien veteran's secondary eyes closed as he remembered. Sergeant Maria Lopez was stationed there with just 40 soldiers. They were defending a communications relay that humans used to coordinate their fleet movements. We sent 2,000 troops to capture it intact. The odds were 50-1 against the humans, Helix 9 observed. Yes, but we had learned not to trust odds when fighting humans, Zekthara replied. Lopez had been preparing that outpost for months. She had turned a simple communication station into a fortress that could hold off an army. The commander's primary eyes focused on something beyond the cantina walls. The battle lasted 3 weeks. Lopez used every trick humans had developed during the war. Booby traps, sniper positions, psychological warfare, and hit-and-run attacks that kept our forces constantly on edge. But what made her truly dangerous was her ability to make us believe we were fighting a much larger force, Zekthara continued. She would attack from multiple directions, using recorded voices and fake radio chatter to convince our scouts that hundreds of humans were hidden throughout the area. How long did this deception last? Until the very end, the veteran admitted. When we finally overran the outpost, we found Lopez alone with 3 wounded soldiers. She had convinced an entire regiment that they were facing battalion strength. Opposition. Even when cornered, she kept fighting until her ammunition ran out. Zekthara's voice grew heavier. Lopez could have surrendered. She could have saved herself and her wounded soldiers. Instead, she used her final moments to transmit our troop positions to the human fleet. Her sacrifice allowed them to ambush our reinforcements as they withdrew. The war was becoming unsustainable for your people. By then, both sides were exhausted, the commander acknowledged. We had lost over half our fleet and our soldiers were breaking under the psychological pressure of fighting an enemy that never gave up. The humans had lost millions of people and most of their worlds, but they kept fighting from hidden bases and mobile fleets. The alien veteran signaled for another drink, though his movements were becoming increasingly unsteady. High Command finally admitted what field commanders had known for months. We could not win this war through military force alone, so peace negotiations began? Reluctantly, Zekthara replied. Neither side wanted to appear weak by asking for talks first. It was the drifter clans who finally offered to mediate discussions on neutral ground. They had been watching the war, destroy both our peoples, and decided someone needed to end it. The commander's scarred face showed old pain. The human negotiator was a diplomat named Ellen Price. She was the sister of Susan Price, the scientist who had developed biological weapons against us. Ellen had lost her entire family in our orbital bombardments, but she still came to the peace talks. What were her terms? Complete withdrawal of Imperial forces from human space, Zekthara said. Recognition of humanity as a sovereign species with equal rights in the galactic community. War reparations for the worlds we had damaged. And most shocking of all, joint military cooperation against future threats. Helix 9 processed this information. Your people agreed to work with humans after everything that had happened? Our negotiator was Counselor Vex Mora, one of the few leaders who understood what we were really facing, the veteran explained. Vex Mora had studied human tactics throughout the war. He knew that fighting them was like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeezed, the more they slipped through your fingers. Vex Mora convinced the Imperial Council that humans were not just another conquered species. Zekthara continued. They were something new in the galaxy, something that could change the balance of power forever. We could either destroy ourselves fighting them or learn to work with them. The alien commander took a shaky drink before continuing. The peace treaty was signed on Epsilon Prime, the same station where we sit now. Both sides agreed to end hostilities and begin what humans called constructive engagement between our species. But the real changes came after the war ended, Zekthara said, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder. Colonel Frank Davis established the first joint military academy, where human and alien officers would train together. The irony was not lost on anyone. Former enemies, working side by side? More than that, the veteran corrected. We were learning from each other. Humans studied our technology and strategic planning methods. We studied their adaptability and unconventional thinking. Both sides became stronger through cooperation than either had been through conflict. Zekthara's primary eyes focused on the journalist. Within 5 years, every major species in the galaxy had restructured their military doctrines based on human warfare principles. The old rules of engagement were abandoned in favor of more flexible, adaptive strategies. How did this affect galactic politics? Everything changed, the commander said simply. The Empire was no longer the dominant power. Humans had proven that determination and innovation could overcome superior numbers and technology. Other species began demanding equal representation in galactic councils. The alien veteran's voice grew thoughtful. The Crystari Federation tried to maintain the old order, but even they eventually accepted that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation had begun. But not everyone adapted easily. Zekthara continued. Many of our soldiers struggled with the idea of working alongside former enemies. Some humans found it difficult to trust species that had tried to exterminate them. The healing process took years. And you? How did you adapt? The commander was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. I spent the first year after the war in a military hospital, not for physical wounds, but for what humans call post-traumatic stress. The memories of what we had done to each other haunted me. What helped you recover? Working with human veterans who had experienced the same trauma? Zekthara replied. We formed support groups where former enemies could share their experiences and help each other heal. It was strange at first, but we discovered that pain is universal, regardless of species. The alien veteran looked directly at Helix 9. That was when I truly understood what made humans so dangerous during the war. It was not their weapons or tactics or willingness to die for their cause. It was their ability to find hope in hopeless situations and to help others do the same. And now, 20 years later. Now the galaxy is a different place, Zekthara said. Humans serve alongside aliens in exploration fleets, research missions, and peacekeeping forces. The Joint Academy has produced a new generation of officers who think of cooperation as natural rather than strange. The commander finished his final drink and stood slowly, his scarred armor catching the dim light. But we must never forget the lessons of that war. Humans showed us that survival is not about being the strongest or most advanced species. It is about being willing to adapt, to sacrifice, and to never give up hope. What is your final message? To those who will read this interview? Zekthara looked out the cantina's windows at the stars beyond the station. The humans taught us that there are no inferior species, only different approaches to the same challenges. They also taught us that underestimating your enemy is the fastest way to defeat yourself. The alien veteran turned back to the journalist. Most importantly, they proved that peace is not just the absence of war. It is the presence of understanding between different peoples who choose to work together rather than fight each other. And if someone threatens that peace, then they will face not just humans but all the species that humans have inspired to stand together. Zekthara replied firmly. That is the true legacy of the human wars. Not the battles we fought, but the galaxy we built together afterward. The commander gathered his belongings and prepared to leave. The humans have a saying, what does not kill you makes you stronger. They nearly killed us all during that war, but in the end they made the entire galaxy stronger. As Zekthara walked, away into the station's corridors, Helix 9 reviewed the recordings of the night. The mechanical journalist had expected to document a story about war and conflict. Instead, it had captured something far more important, a testament to the power of understanding between former enemies and the hope that even the most bitter conflicts could lead to lasting peace. The cantina fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems, but the echoes of the alien veteran's words would soon spread throughout the galaxy, reminding all species that their future lay not in conquest but in cooperation.